Okay, good morning, folks. We are recording this morning, so I'll try not to say anything too silly or stupid. I will be gone tomorrow, so for any reason anybody's looking for me, I'll be out all day. Not sick, I don't have the COVID. I've got a personal day, taking a day off to go watch my daughter's cheerleading contest, so it'll be a nice, fun day. So I'm going to record this lesson, so Purple kids can listen to this on Purple Day. So today, we just got done checking the quiz. So Purple kids, you will have handed yours in at this point. Either the substitute will check them or I'll get around to checking them when I get back on Friday sometime. But then we're starting a new chapter. So we just finished chapter 14 with that quiz, a relatively quick chapter. Our goal now, so our next sort of benchmark for our timeline, we need to finish chapter 15, 16, and 17 by the end of March. So we have a little over a month to get through the Civil War and what's called Reconstruction. So it kind of is one of my favorite topics. I like talking about it. I like trying to think about what kind of things can pull a country apart, could force us to want to fight other Americans. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's kind of, I guess, the Civil War, if we want to make a super simple, stupid comparison, it's sort of like a family feud. Sometimes that happens within your family when your dad's mad at your uncle and they don't talk for a few months, or I doubt probably they physically fight, but they probably did when they were younger. Or if you look at it from your perspective, if you have brothers and sisters, there are probably times when you get so angry with each other that you smack them upside the head, and then they smack you back, and then it turns into a domestic World War III. Domestic means within your home. So that kind of stuff happens. I grew up with 3 brothers, so I definitely know how that works. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And those of you that are only children, you're a bunch of spoiled brats. Those of you that if you're the youngest and you have a middle and an older, and the older will protect you, you're a spoiled brat. You're weak because of it. Those of you that are middle, we have to be tougher than everyone else. True, middles?
Yes.
Yes, because you get picked on by the olders, then the youngers pick on us, and they shouldn't be able to pick on us, but they're protected by the olders, or by mom, because they're the baby. And it's not fair. And I have a little bitterness still in my heart because I'm the middle. Yes.
So I'm an only child on my mom's side.
So
On my dad's side,
right.
I'm a middle. So what am I?
It depends on who you're around, I guess. So some of the family spoils the snot out of you, and some of the family is horrible.
No.
I'm telling you, being in the middle is the toughest. How many of you are the oldest? And you get away with everything because your parents don't know yet. They don't know what they don't know. How many of you are the babies? Okay, so yeah, those of us that are middles, we hate you both.
I grew up with 2 sisters though.
Yeah, that's true.
I have a sister. She's 10 years older than me and tries to kill me.
Oh, my sister
Well,
does that.
Just looking at you, I don't know if I blame her, buddy. It's just the way life works that way.
It's okay, my sister told me. She's only 1.
Anyway, so the Civil War that we're leading into, and chapter 15 is called A Nation Breaking Apart. So we got to figure out what are the things that trip the trigger. So in my house, it was games. We tried to play board games. Like game night didn't work at my house because it usually ended up in massive, major physical altercation with fighting brothers versus brothers and civil war within the home. There weren't very many times when we were united. You know, the times when I can think of that my family was united, really the only times I can think of when I was in high school, I was maybe a little bit mouthy and probably should have got beat up a lot, but my older brother didn't allow it. So I think America is really good at being united when we're under attack. If somebody attacks us, it doesn't matter where we're attacked. It's America, or you know, the nationalistic feeling that we've got when we watch the Olympics, which are on TV right now. And to be honest with you, I've never been as disinterested in the Olympics as I have been this year. Winter Olympics to me are not as interesting as Summer Olympics. The sports are just not. We don't live in a place where ice skating is a big thing, or snow skiing, or any that kind of stuff. So it's just not as exciting as for me as watching track and field and summer games. But
those are examples of when we have unity, when we're not breaking apart. War sometimes is a great unifier for a country as long as it's not us versus us. And this is one of the first times we see a civil war hit the United States. And most countries that have civil wars cannot endure civil wars. So how we come through it on the backside has a lot to do with the power of our leaders and the strength of our Constitution and our government's ability to hold us back together or to bring us back together. A lot of countries will fall apart and separate into two countries, whereas today we don't see a lot of animosity between the North and the South. And the cultures of the North and the South are very, very different. And as you grow older and go on vacations or travel the country for different reasons, you see how are the southern states different from the northern states, and how is the Midwest different from the rest of the country. I think a lot of times what you see, that the Midwest, I think from my travels, I would say is a little bit sometimes outdated. Like we're still living 20 years ago sometimes, not always. But I also think probably the Midwest is maybe a friendlier part of the country. You know, people are please and thank you here. Whereas we don't get that everywhere we go. It's just part of what we're trained to do. And I think we treat each other relatively well most of the time. You know, we open doors for each other. We help little old ladies carry the groceries. We just do stuff that isn't necessary, but it's right. And that's, you know, it's a good thing. We have weaknesses as Midwesterners, probably, I suppose so, but it's a good place to be for the most part. So when we look at the nation breaking apart, we have to look at what are those big differences that cause us to want to kill each other. Because war is horrible. War within your own country has got to be worse than war against another country. For one major reason, everybody that dies is American. So that's kind of where we're going in chapter 15, is taking a look at what are those weaknesses that draw us apart from each other, and how are we going to overcome it is what we get into. Chapter 16 is the war itself, and then chapter 17, when the war is over, how do we recover from it? That recovery is called reconstruction, like rebuilding. So when a tornado hits a town, we don't just leave the town. We have to rebuild everything. We've got to haul away all the garbage, and we've got to put up new buildings and start from scratch. So some of what we're going to look at least in the beginning of the notes for chapter 15, and there is a new set of fill-in notes. By the way, we have a choice in this chapter, and I can go back if you want me to, because I have both sets. I created a set that looks just like the last chapter, and I created the regular fill-in notes. Do you have a preference, or do you want me to put the other set also in Google Classroom? Does anybody care? To make a difference? I know our chapter 14 test was easy because really you just had to follow the notes. But does anybody like the other style better than this style? You do? Okay. That's almost half the class. So go with this for today, and then when I have time, probably during my plan third block, I'll put the other set in and you can use it from then on. I don't guarantee I'll do that every chapter, but I'm fairly certain I have that for chapter 15. So happy to comply with your wishes, my people. Anyway, we're looking at 1846 to 1861. The Civil War really gets its start in 1860 or early 1861, so this leads us up to the Civil War. If we back up a little bit and take a look at how we get to the point where we're at, it's not something that happens overnight. The Civil War is brewing for a while. Your battles with your siblings usually aren't snap things. It's multiple things that have been happening, and this could be with your friends too. Multiple things have been happening, and then they do something that finally puts you over the top, and you've got to hit back. That's why we're looking at the background. If we look at current events, and you don't have to know a lot about this, but as it is currently, if you turn on the news, Russia has several 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine, and it looks like there's a strong possibility that Russia could invade Ukraine. Ukraine hasn't done anything. It's not like they're, flicking them in the ear every time they walk by. It's not like there's been this something that's all of a sudden taking the Russians off. The Russians just want it. But they don't just want it because it's shiny and pretty and new. They want it because it used to be part of the Soviet Union. So everything has a history, and it just kind of builds up. I don't think I've ever seen a fight in school where someone just gets ticked and walks up to the hallway and punches Morgan in the nose. If that happens, there's always a backside to the story. Now, punching Morgan in the nose is never okay. Well, maybe once. No, never. It's never okay. But if I take Chastity, punched her in the nose, and I take them and sit them both down, and I say, all right, what's going on? I'm going to do it separately because you're just going to try hitting each other. And Chastity says, well, she stole my boyfriend, and then she made fun of me because I drink weird stuff. Looks like human urine with blood in it. So I decided to punch her in the nose because I'm tired of her. And then I say, Morgan, really, what happened? Why did she punch you in the nose? And Morgan's response is, I didn't do anything. Well, maybe I'm dating her boyfriend. And then everything sort of gets clear. So there's always a background. It's not ever just Chastity's like, bam, punch you in the nose. I guess I shouldn't say not ever, because we've had some kids in school that would do that. And it's like, what is going on? Why are you doing that, weirdo? But we go all the way back to 1600. We came and developed the colonies, and we developed those colonies to avoid things like persecution, being picked on for religious differences, opportunities, the idea that maybe gold could be discovered in North America. Under the British control in the 1700s, fighting for independence. At that time, slavery is introduced to America. In the early 1800s, we steadily creeping across the country, Louisiana Purchase, killing off Indian populations and increasing the need for slaves. What was that one big invention that created the cause for the increase in the need for slaves? Do you remember? Cotton gin. Very good. So I was just grading. I've got some people that are still working on that essay question from back like a month and a half ago. But yeah, so we're seeing changes always taking place. We see changes taking place today in America. Some of them are for the better, and some of them are like, what, really? And here's the thing: anytime a change takes place, is everybody happy about it? You think about family decisions. How many family decisions are ever made that everyone is completely satisfied? Not very often. Most of the time there's some form of compromise involved where both groups, both sides of the family, if there's a family argument, get some of what they want. But it's pretty rare that we're always all happy about everything. We just went over that 3 minutes ago, that half the class isn't happy that I put the old school type of fill-in notes back into Google Classroom. So you're angry with me. You're probably going to punch me in the nose because I gave you the old school. Whereas last chapter, and I put them in there and changed it up, everyone was like, why did you do that? What's wrong with the old ones? And then change sometimes is good. Mid-1800s, we see gold rush, we achieve our manifest destiny, and slavery is going to continue to expand because of inventions and improvements in factory conditions. So this is America in a super small nutshell of one slide of an entire slideshow. This is kind of where we've been. Taking you back also to territorial expansion. Remember when Missouri became a state in 1820? They asked for statehood and originally were declined because they were a slave state. The reason they were declined is because we didn't want to upset the balance of power between slave and free. So the compromise, the Missouri Compromise, said, okay, we'll just add them as a slave state and we'll create a new state, Maine, as a free state. And then they also promised in the Missouri Compromise there would be no new slave states north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude, which is the southern border of Missouri. And I'll show you on the map in just a bit. So this is just remember, because we're getting really close to filling in that territory that's up there. But we're talking about the time period right before 1860. So, who remembers rules or compromises that were made 30 or 40 years ago? They're outdated. We're not paying attention to that stuff. So we're going to have a bit of an issue, and it's going to create some violence. We also created, and this was never talked about in the chapter, but when we took all that land from Mexico, a rule was created, a proviso, called the Wilmot Proviso, which said None of the territory taken from Mexico should have slaves. Who does that anger, by the way? Again, decisions never make everybody happy. Southerners that want to expand into those western territories and take with them slaves. So again, it's almost impossible to make decisions that make everybody happy. Could we? Sure. We can make some decisions right now. I could say, cotton candy for everyone. And you guys would be like, woohoo! And that makes everybody happy. Except for probably Edward. He's like, I don't like cotton candy. Because he's an old grumpy man.
I like cotton candy, I just don't want diabetes.
Well, that's probably a good point. Fair. If you only have it once, it's not that big of a deal. Does anybody else think Edward is kind of like the grumpy old man in that cartoon movie with the balloons on the house?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that kind of like the old man, his wife died, and then he becomes friends with a little Boy Scout? Does that remind anybody of Edward?
But he wouldn't become friends with the little boy.
Yes, he
Kinda
would.
Like push him out.
Wait, what is the old guy's name?
Yes, I am very.
Edward, I think.
That.
I think it's Edward. I don't really know, but kind of reminds me of that. And I would, I don't know if I told you guys, we got one of our dogs back. You know, we were missing both of our dogs. Did I tell you that? I'm still excited about it. We're still looking for the Aussie. She's the older one. I'm pretty happy about that anyway.
How'd they go missing?
They just took off. They run free and usually they stay on our property, but I guess they must have went a little too far and got dazed and confused. So anyway, we have one of the two back with us, happy. Still sad, but happy. So we also see the Compromise of 1850 that said new states balance the power of slave states. So this map kind of demonstrates where we're at with all those compromises. The Missouri Compromise line here on the southern border of Missouri, the northern border of what is today Oklahoma. I think my laser's running out of battery. It creates this unorganized territory up here, which is made today of Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa and South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado. It's kind of got a little bit of everything in it. It's pretty much what's left of Louisiana territory after we settle Missouri and eventually even Texas. We also see the area of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California where no new slavery because of the Wilmot Proviso. And then even Oregon country. It doesn't really say anything about slaves in Oregon territory, but what do we know about the necessity of slaves the further north you go? None of as bad because the type of agriculture they practice is not as intense. Just think about Nebraska. If Nebraska had been given the opportunity or the option to have slaves, we probably wouldn't have. And if Nebraska was allowed to have slavery, and we weren't because we don't become a state until after the 13th Amendment is created, making slavery illegal anyway. So Nebraska doesn't ever have that option, even if we wanted to. But the only people that would have had them probably would have had like house slaves, you know, cleaning toilets and vacuuming the floor and stuff like that. Kind of like all of us would like to have a little brother just to do that. Boys are horrible at that stuff. So a little sister just so we can make clean the toilets and dust and vacuum and do all those chores that we don't like doing. So we see massive division in America already. The limey green states, those are free states that do either disallow slavery, meaning it's not allowed, or they definitely don't encourage it. And the orange, or is that red or orange? Orange. Kind of matches your shirt, orange. Burnt red. How's that sound? It's not really burnt orange. I don't know. Anyway, those are the slave states. So there's kind of a balance of power between them, and then Arkansas territory later will become Indian territory, open to slavery because of the Missouri Compromise. So this map sets up what will become the free and the slave states, what will become the North and the South, what will become the Union and the Confederacy, with a few exceptions. Some of these slave states, like Missouri, for instance, even though they're a slave state, they choose to not leave. They're not going to join the South in the fight against the North. So when you come into class in this next chapter or so, and your mind is telling you that the Civil War is fought over slavery, That's not necessarily the case. And I'll give you multiple examples today throughout chapter 15 and then even more in chapter 16 that demonstrates the Civil War was bigger than just the issue of slavery. If it was just slavery, would a slave state like Missouri stay in the Union, or would they join the Confederacy of the South? They joined the Confederacy. So it can't be just about slavery. There's more to it than that. So in the Compromise of 1850, new states threatened the balance of free and slave. California wanted in as a free state, but Congress was sort of split over it. So here's the compromise. We decided to add California as free, but let's outlaw slavery in D.C. So it sort of still keeps the balance of power. They also promised to not take up laws over slavery in territories taken from Mexico. And it did not make either side completely happy because of the reasons we just talked about. Would there have been people in 1867 in Nebraska that would have liked to have owned slaves? Maybe. Wealthy people. In fact, would you say that there are probably people in America today that would like to own a slave? Seems weird to think about, but do you think if it wasn't outlawed, there are still people that are that way? I think so. Maybe not, but I think so. So when we look at the differences, it starts to paint a picture of why we are so different when it comes to the causes of the Civil War. We start to see that the South and the North are just extremely different. Their economies are totally different. Economy means how do you make your money? So when we look at the economy of the North, it's very, very industrial. So they have factories running the show. If we look at the economy of the South, it's going to be completely different. So the differences in the way people live and how they act are part of the reason why we have war. You don't fight with your brothers and sisters because you're exactly the same as them. You fight with them because you have differences of opinion on things. Like middle children. How is it that when we play Monopoly, your older brother or sister always quits halfway through and gives all of the properties to the younger? Yeah, differences in the way we think things should work. Instead of dividing it up equally or just putting it back in the bank, they give it to the, and then it's like, I can't win now, this is up, and then you throw the table up in the air, and you start kicking and punching and pulling hair, and war is on. So we see there's differences in the way we think. And the factories are going to continue to run as long as they've got cotton. Having cotton means there's a need for slaves. So even though the northern states were most likely to be against slavery, do you understand that a lot of northerners weren't necessarily against slavery? Why? Even though it doesn't make any sense that northerners would support slavery because they didn't own slaves, why is it true that many northerners weren't abolitionists? Word from the last chapter means to get rid of slavery.
Because like they're having factories, they need someone to have like make products so they can make things with it.
Very good. For those of you listening on the YouTube, it's because they had a need in their factories for the products that were being produced by slaves. So it's easy for us, for instance, to look at China. We'll use a modern day example. Why is the stuff that we buy from China so cheap? Say louder.
They make a lot of it quickly.
They produce a lot of it quickly. How are they able to produce a lot of stuff quickly? They have a lot of people. Why is it so cheap, besides the quickness of productivity?
Not as good as materials.
Could be inferior materials. Sometimes it is. How much do they pay their workers in China?
Not much.
Yeah, not much. There is no such thing as a minimum wage, and they've got a huge labor pool that need jobs. So stuff is really cheap coming from China, not because they have slave labor, but it's really close to it. People work for almost nothing and they live in horrible conditions because of the types of positions that they're put in. So as Americans, can we look at those people, a regular average Chinese person, and say, wow, I feel bad that you live in such horrible conditions. In America, we're protected from those conditions because we've got minimum wage rights. And even minimum wage today, it's crazy. There's a minimum wage in Nebraska. It's like, I don't know, $9 or something like that. But there aren't any jobs that you'll go find that only pay $9, at least right now. A few years ago, maybe so, but someone said, and I don't know this because I haven't applied there, but McDonald's starts at 15.
That's for people above 14, 15,
So older kids,
yeah,
if you go there, how much do you get?
like $10 now.
10? So a lot of places start at 10, 12, 13, 14, $15 an hour because they can't find good workers. So minimum wage is kind of thrown out the window, but if they don't have that in places like China, and we feel bad, we're like, oh, you poor Chinese people working for almost nothing and starving to death. Why do they still have jobs working for almost nothing? Who is making their conditions or continuing the crazy circle of keeping their conditions bad? We are. How? Because we buy all their stuff. So even though Northerners might not have liked the idea of slavery, it's partly their problem that it exists in the South because they're utilizing the product. And Northerners don't want slavery to go away necessarily because if it goes away, then Southerners who are growing the cotton have to hire workers. And if they have to pay workers, what happens to the cost of the good that they're producing? It's going to go up, which is going to affect everyone. If the Chinese enact a minimum wage and they start paying their workers twice what they're getting paid now, what happens to the cheap stuff that we buy from China? It gets more expensive. So it's in our best interest that Chinese workers get paid garbage. So it's partly our fault. It's not our fault. We can't blame ourselves for this one, except we keep buying their stuff. But if we stop buying their stuff, what happens to them? They lose their jobs and they're totally toast. So their condition could actually worsen. So we don't blame ourselves for it, but that's the reason why their conditions persist the way they do, because we buy the cheap stuff. We like the cheap stuff. Even if the quality sometimes is inferior, we still buy it. There were some abolitionists. Those are the people that believe slavery was immoral and wrong. Those are the ones that are saying, hey, I'm willing to pay more for cotton from the South if we get rid of slavery. But that's usually a pretty minimal group of people. What, by the way, since prices have changed or wages have changed and all of a sudden McDonald's is paying $10, $12, $15 an hour, what's happened to the cost of a Big Mac? It's gone up. So even though you're getting paid more to go work at a job, the cost of stuff is also increasing. So McDonald's can't pay you $15 an hour and keep Big Macs at 99 cents. I honestly have no idea how much a Big Mac is. Probably $2.50, $1.50. I have no idea. I don't really look at that. I just put my card in the thing when I go. I don't actually go. I like McDonald's breakfast, but I don't really care for the rest of their food.
$4.
$4 for a Big Mac. I like the sausage, egg, and cheese McGriddle. That is so dilly. We had one of those, Jason. It's like eating a pancake with sausage and eggs and cheese mixed into it. You should probably tomorrow go get one. Or Friday, because PLC late start, go get yourself the sausage, egg, and cheese McGriddle. You'll like it. Probably become addicted to it and have to get one every day. It's sort of like Chastity comes in drinking these weird fruity drinks every day. The other day she's got one made out of strawberries. Today, I'm not still really sure what that is. Who knows what she'll bring to drink on Friday. Something to go with Jace's sausage, egg, and cheese McGriddle. You thinking about it now, Jace? Why not? All right, when you go get one, pick one up for me too, please. We'll take a little 5-minute breakfast break Friday morning. First block, have some McDonald's sandwiches. So if you want Stop, pick yourself up, some Mickey D's. Make it happen. Don't get like the hot cakes and syrup, because you slobs will get it all over my desk, and then everyone all day will be sticky. Get something not sticky. What's your go-to there, Daggett?
Mine?
Yeah. Mickey D's breakfast, what are you going with?
I don't know. Honestly.
How's that hard decision?
No, there's a lot of
Egg McMuffin? Those are
Yes,
good.
that's what I don't
Yeah,
really
those are good. You hate McGriddles?
Yes.
What are you anyway? Weird? Everybody loves them.
I've never
I've
had
never
one.
had
Well, let's go sideways on this discussion just for a second. I apologize to those of you watching my YouTube. These are discussions sometimes turn. Okay, so every now and then McDonald's comes out with the McRib. Okay. You either love or you hate the McRib. So just a quick show of hands poll. How many of you are lovers of the McRib? Like, I like the McRib, it's good. Really? A tiny percent, like there's only 4 of us.
I haven't had it.
Now, if I ask that question in Tannen's class, he will be a hard no, because one time I think, like McRibs were 2 for $4 or something, so he tried to eat 2, and then he barfed. I don't know if it was because of the McRib or because he was sick, but it's one of those things that if that happens, you don't touch that food ever again. Same thing with broccoli, it makes him puke for some reason, so. I had a weird kid. You don't like broccoli either? I love broccoli.
I like cooked broccoli.
Cooked with Parmesan is no good.
I like to put it in the air fryer and crisp it up a little with a little salt and pepper and maybe some oil. What about cauliflower?
I like cooked cauliflower.
Both of them? I love cauliflower. Anyway, so here's the thing, and this is one, I'm giving you evidence that the Civil War isn't just about slavery. Most Southern whites were poor. If you're poor, can you own slaves? No, slaves are expensive. So many of them couldn't afford to own slaves. So if this is a war about slavery and only about slavery, are Southern whites that don't own slaves going to fight to protect the issue of slavery? Absolutely not. If I don't have an interest in it, I'm not going to risk my life. I'm not going to risk my son's life or my brother's life or my uncle's life to fight over something that does not impact me. You have to be a real crusader to care enough to fight over some issue that's not your issue. We all have issues, things that we care about more than other things. Part of our crusade, if we have an issue, is to get other people to care about it. But if I don't own slaves and I'm a poor white farmer, one, I can't afford to go to war because I need to stay home and work on my farm. So there's got to be something deeper than just the issue of slavery in the Civil War. That right there is maybe our first piece of evidence to support that. Southerners who did have slaves, and we've gone over this before, this was reviewed for us too, they justified their slaveriness. If we believe something is bad, we have to come up with a justification for why it is bad. So Isabella can say broccoli is bad because I get sick every time I eat it. Is that a fair justification to not eat it if you're Isabella? Yes, it is. Is it a fair justification that Tannen won't touch a McRib because he barfed one time when he ate it? Yes, it is. Because at least in his mind, he's making a connection that McRibs make me vomit. They don't make me vomit. I kind of like them. They are probably gross, disgusting meat, but still, they're tasty. Slathered in barbecue. You can't eat one without getting messy fingers, though. That's the problem. It's like eating ribs, like real ribs. You can't eat ribs. We can't eat fried chicken. You know, there's some foods that are just delicious that you have to make a mess with. And you have to look bad eating it. Like it's all over your face, and then you just clean yourself up afterwards. So anyway, they have to justify why they're doing bad things. So they're introducing them to Christianity. We're bringing them to God. Yay for us. We're providing them with things like food, clothing, and shelter because as they were running around in Africa, like we saw when we watched the clip from Roots, they're half naked. They're barbaric. We got to give them clothes and regular food and regular shelter. We can't have them living in weird-looking little tents. But they were fine doing that in Africa, and they'd done it that way for centuries. So their lifestyle was fine for them. It's just different than ours. And that's where American tolerance should come into play, but it doesn't necessarily always work that way. So we have to come up with reasons why it's a good thing, even though we know in the back of our mind it's a bad thing. So, Isabella, you should eat broccoli because it's good for you. The darker green the vegetable is, the better it is for you. Even if it makes you sick, you should still eat it. That's the justification that we give for everybody eats broccoli. It's okay for those of us that like broccoli. It's not okay for those that don't like broccoli, especially if it makes you sick. Maybe you're allergic to it. How about, look at that guy's googly eyes there. Both of them. Look at that guy. Holy cow. So we start to see the abolition movement grow. As slavery grows, the more slaves there are, the more abolitionists they are, because the more people hear about how bad slavery is. And at some point we can't avoid it, even if it doesn't directly affect us. We can't avoid it, we can't ignore it. I don't like to see people mistreated because they're different, or they're weird, or they don't meet the social norm. I don't always necessarily stand up for it, but I will if I don't like the way someone's being treated. The issue becomes political. A political party is created. Again, we typically think of political parties being Democrat and Republican, but I've already introduced you to one that wasn't, actually two, three. We started off with Federalists and Anti-Federalists. In the last chapter, we had a group called the Know-Nothings. And in this chapter, we have people called Free Soilers. They want to stop slavery expanding into those Western territories. The platform for the Free Soil Party, platform means what are they promising when they run for president? Like, if you elect me, I will do this. Like James K. Polk a couple chapters ago said, 54-40 or fight, if you elect me, we will take Oregon territory. So their platform is free soil, free land, free speech, free labor, and free men. Everything is free, free. The reality is this is kind of a difficult thing to get people to understand, because is anything really free?
No,
No, free sounds great.
until you see the cost.
How do we pay for free? Taxes. That's great. Let's have free college for everyone. To you guys, that's like, woo, because you want to go to college without a bill. But then when you get out of college and you have a job, your taxes are crazy outrageous because you're paying for college for the next group going through. Or free health care. Woo! Sounds great. Health care is expensive. The amount of money that my family spends just on health insurance through my wife's work is crazy. But we have to have it, because if something goes wrong, like when I broke my neck, that treatment and surgery was probably $100,000. So if I didn't have insurance, it would have bankrupted the whole family. Actually, I was a workman's comp claim, so I didn't have to pay for any of it because it happened at work. So, but anyway, free is kind of an easy sell because people are like, yes, I love free. But then in the long run, it has to get paid for somewhere. Either with debt, we borrow money to pay for free, or with taxes. I don't like my taxes getting raised, but I do like free. So we kind of get stuck in the middle of a conundrum. Does free college sound good to me? Well, yes and no. Why yes? Because I have two kids. Me, I'm done with college, but I have two kids that will go to college. So free college would save me a lot of money, but it also raised my taxes. So we gotta be careful when we offer anything for free. Now the free soil, free land, that's not that difficult in the mid-1800s because we had a vast country of land that could be given away. Today, yeah, we can't offer that to people because all the land is taken up and it's owned by either private individuals. Actually, the government is the largest landowner in the United States, so they have a lot of land, but most of the land the government has is mountains and parks and stuff like that that can't be farmed anyway. Free speech, of course, that's a promise to all Americans. Beefing up free speech, maybe. Free labor, I don't really know what that means. Free men, that means abolition. So it's pretty easy to get people to join the Free Soil Party. Here's a kind of a fun fact. The first person to run for president on an anti-slavery abolitionist platform was John Fremont. Why do we know the name John C. Fremont. Because our neighboring town, Fremont, is named for the guy. In the summer in Fremont, we have Gateway to the West days, they have John C. Fremont days that they celebrate. I don't know what they do there. Rodeo maybe, they have rodeo in Fremont. I don't know what they do in John C. Fremont days. Anyway, kind of cool. So he's an anti-slavery guy. We're almost done for today. But these are, posters that are put up. Television and radio didn't exist, so if you want people to come to your rallies, you have to put posters up. Come one, come all to the Free Soul Party rally. It is an uphill battle to convince people that slavery is bad. Part of the Compromise of 1850 created what was called the Fugitive Slave Act. Does anybody know what a fugitive is? A person running from the law. So if you break the law, like last week, I don't know if you guys know this, but Sam robbed a bank. They're looking for her now, but they don't know it was exactly her. So she is a fugitive from the law because she's broken the law and they're trying to find her. How much money did you get? You don't want to say, do you? Is it enough that you can buy Jason and I a sausage, egg, and cheese McGriddle on Friday morning? Jace, Sam's buying.
Oh, okay.
Sweet. I'll also like an orange juice, please.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, if you're a runaway slave, you could be arrested and taken back into slavery without a trial. This is scary. The Fugitive Slave Act is scary not just for runaway slaves who have escaped, like Harriet Tubman, who has escaped to the north, or Frederick Douglass. This is scary to every black person in the north. So bounty hunters would go into the north and capture runaway slaves. But let's say you are all black people that live in the north. If you are a free man, you better carry papers with you that document that you're a free man. Just like when I drive a car, if I'm driving a car, I better have a driver's license. So if you're confronted by a bounty hunter, and the bounty hunter says, Morgan, are you a free man or are you a runaway? Prove that you're a free woman. Free man, that's not nice. Prove that. So Morgan gets out her papers and says, of course I'm free. Here's my papers, like a driver's license. Here's my papers that say I'm a free man. If I'm a bounty hunter, what can I do that's cruel and evil and inhumane and not okay? Take those papers, put them in a fire, burn them. Now she's got no proof. What do I do with her? Take her back into the South and sell her. So every black person in America, whether they were in a free state or a slave state, because of the Fugitive Slave Act, had to be looking over their shoulder. It also made it illegal for me to help slaves or help blacks in the North, especially runaways. So if I'm caught aiding slaves and escaping slavery, I'm guilty too. So this makes it even more difficult. The South thought it was great. The North's response, this woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was the daughter of a preacher named Lyman Beecher, and I didn't mention him in the last chapter because I've cut some stuff out over the years. Lyman Beecher was the answer to number 7 on your test that asked who was an influential person that was pushing temperance. It was Harriet Beecher Stowe's father, Lyman. You don't need to know that. So she writes this book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a fictional book based on truth. So it's really what I guess we'd call historical fiction. And it talks about the horrors of slavery. Most Northerners, Northern whites, are just going through life, bumbling around, living their dream, working, playing, doing whatever it is they do. There's not a whole lot of downtime, so playing and leisure is not really a thing in the 1800s. You just work, you eat, you sleep, you go to church, you work, you eat, you sleep. That's pretty much life for an average person. But Stowe writes this book that becomes a bestseller, and people are unaware of how bad slavery is until they read Fugitive Slave book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And then once we find out how bad something is, we have to do something about it. So this actually increases the number of abolitionists because it's like the top #1 bestseller, even though it's a fictional account of slavery in the South. It's based on reality. And Harriet Beecher Stowe's book turns people into abolitionists. It's easy for me to ignore bad things going on around me if I don't see them. But when they're in front of me, I can't ignore them anymore. The North loved it and the South hated it. The last slide for today. We're going to have violence. There's a rule created in Congress called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act divides the territory into Nebraska and Kansas. So instead of one gigantic chunk, we've got Nebraska territory and Kansas territory. Now, according to the Missouri Compromise, that map that I showed you earlier in class, could Kansas or Nebraska be slave based on their location on the map?
No.
According to the Missouri Compromise from 1820, it's not an option. But in this new law, in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, they decided to allow the people in those territories to vote. Kansas has a bigger population. They're going to become a state before Nebraska. It's not an issue for Nebraska because of the date of our statehood after the Civil War. So they're going to use popular sovereignty, which means let the class decide. So if we use popular sovereignty to decide the fate of the McRib, what would happen to the McRib based on the number of people that raised their hands and said, let's keep it?
Destroy it.
It goes away. That's what popular sovereignty does. We take a vote. If more people like it, we keep it. If more people don't like it, we don't keep it. It'll be curious to me to see how the other classes answer that question. I think there were 3 of us, is all 4 maybe, counting me. This makes the Missouri Compromise useless. Again, we're just taking laws and ignoring them. Not supposed to do that. So Kansas is going to erupt into fighting, and we'll get into greater detail on this, and you can see if you look ahead a few slides, and I saw some people looking at least the picture. That picture is one of my favorite lessons, by the way. That'll be on Friday, or Monday for you Burton kids. There were more pro-slave people in Kansas so when Kansas is deciding to vote as to whether to be free or slave, Kansas, based on its geography and the type of crops that they're going to end up growing in Kansas, should be a free state. Based on the Missouri Compromise, it should be a free state. But on the day they decide to vote, 5,000 Missourians sneaked into Kansas and cast ballots in favor of slavery. Understand, this is a time when you could vote in multiple places. You just walk into the polling place and you cast your ballot. It's a little different than today. So we've talked about voting before, and you guys know, based on what I've told you or based on what your parents have taught you, that there's only one place I can go vote. My voting place is Reach Church. So when it's time to vote on voting day, I walk in, I'm a registered voter, so when you turn 18, you have to get registered. It's a really easy process. It takes 2 minutes of your life to do it, so you need to do it. When I register, they want to know my address, and because of my address, they say your voting place is Reach. So on voting day, I walk into Reach. They open up a book that has all the names of the people that are eligible to vote there. They find my name, and they put my initials, or I put my initials next to my name. That means I've already been there and voted. I can't go back and vote twice. There are other polling places. The Catholic Church has one. Churches make great polling places because during the week, you're usually not that busy. They used to do it in schools, but that sort of disrupts the day in a school. Arbor Park used to be a voting place, so they'd open up the gym, but then you can't have PE class because there's people coming and going all day. Plus, we don't really want a bunch of weirdos running around in our schools. We kind of like to know who's here at all times because weirdos can cause us problems. So back then, you could vote 10 times if you wanted to. You just go from one place to the next and vote. So these border ruffians sneak into Kansas and cast their votes in favor of slavery, causing problems. And this problem is going to lead us into a kerfuffle that we just can't get over in American history. So that'll be the story that we start with on Friday. I think is the next slide a picture of a scary-looking man. You've also seen the same picture of the scary-looking man in the hallway. If you look at my pictures, that was an end-of-the-year project last year. I hope to do something similar to it this year because it was kind of fun. Anyway, we'll start with that picture, and I'm going to ask you to make a lot of observations about that picture. So it's not that you have to do it as homework, but when you're looking at it, think about what you're seeing. You don't have to go further ahead, because this is where we're gonna stop today. So, we've got issues, and the issue of slavery is bubbling up. Just keep in mind, at least the seed planted in the back of your head, slavery itself is not the cause of the war. It's gonna be a whole compilation of things that are gonna create the chaos that erupts into this stuff. Any questions today?
Anybody want to chip in and try to buy Macy's some pants that aren't full of holes?
You know, I think you should buy some pants.
I have pants. My pants don't even have holes in 'em.